Like many in my generation, I used to listen to a lot of George Carlin. One of the most useful lessons I learned from him, from his book Brain Droppings, was the power of the phrase, "Who says so?" I think it's a perfectly valid question that takes the wind out of the sails of so many arguments. Because if you know something, you can explain it or back it up somehow. If you're just talking out of your ass, the words might make you stop and think. It's not that you're wrong if you just can't answer the question. The question itself is a tool that helps us find the truth, or at least expose the lies. Why don't we ask it so much as adults? How did we lose it? Seems like something we should talk about. It's amazing how many of our beliefs are wrong. How many things we believe as a culture that are actually just old wives' tales. It seems like every day I watch or read something that explodes a myth I and everyone else apparently believed. Has anyone ever told you the Great Wall of China is the only human-made structure on Earth you can see from space? Why would that be true? It's not that big. But the real question is, who says? Where did you hear that? I heard it as a kid, so I don't remember who told me, but I'm pretty sure they didn't work for NASA. It was like my friend or his older brother or something. If you're curious enough, you might already know a million more examples of popular misconceptions. Tell us your favorites in the comments. When we learned them, we probably didn't think to ask, who says so? And it wouldn't have mattered because the other person wouldn't have known either. It's not like they provided sources. They just told us something everyone else seems to believe, and we didn't think to question it. Who are we to go against the grain? But why didn't we question it? Why don't we question everything? Kids often ask why, and then further questions to try to get to the root of things. What happens as we grow up that harms our critical faculties? Most of us get told what to think by parents, schools, media, wherever else the messages come from. As kids, we don't know much, so when someone sounds like an authority, we better listen. If we listen, we might get rewarded with high marks for good behavior, which is obedience. If we don't listen, we get punished by the school and our parents, which might include guilt-tripping us, so we end up punishing ourselves too. If we learn to feel scared or guilty because we don't obey authority, those tendencies can stay with us our whole lives. As a child, we learn religion. If we were free from the jump to ask, who says so? We would have a different relationship with religion. Every argument from religion is an argument that God says this is the way things are. But who says that's what God says? Who says God even exists? If we assume God is real, we still have no evidence whatsoever that what is written down and claimed as God's words are God's words. So who says they're God's words? Humans. Not gods. If God comes down and tells me what's up, then I'll know for sure. If you present me with some kind of evidence God said these things, I'll listen. But how could you? There is no such evidence. Until then, all I know is there are some books written by humans. People will say that I reject God, but really I just reject their assertions about God. And there are so many assertions. The creation of the universe and the origins of life, heaven and hell, the claims of people claim were prophets, the unscientific explanations for why things happen that tend to turn into excuses for bigotry. Why does it always turn out to be the gays? Every claim can be fairly countered with, who says so? But you can see in how religion is taught one of the first cuts against our ability to question what we're told. If kids were free to question religion and then join or not join as they liked, how many would ever become religious? Why would they just accept what's written if they weren't pressured into believing and declaring that it was the unimpeachable word of God? I know people disagree with me. That's okay. Being religious doesn't make you bad or foolish. I can talk about religion without saying who says so. I just think we should be asking the question more, and religion is a good place to start. But there are innumerable ways to apply the question. Don't use it like a smartass, because that's just annoying. Use it critically to attack someone's claim and, if possible, get to the truth, even if the truth is just that the person's making it up. So you might want to say it to question the existence of climate change, the shape of the Earth, evolution, or the fact that there's no link between vaccines and autism. But if the person assuming those things knows about them, they might be able to explain them to you. Not to say millions of people say so, or that they're smart so they must be correct, but they can explain how these things actually work, so you understand, so it all makes sense. You might question some of the government's or corporations' claims about climate change and vaccines and so on. We can question any claims. But it's not clever to insist something science has long established as fact isn't true just because you don't understand the data, RFK Jr. But those topics are more science and less social construct. Racism, patriarchy, ableism, and transphobia are unscientific social constructs. So they're wide open to who says so. People will often take one or a number of cases and imply these examples prove people in that group are bad. For example, as part of their patriarchal crusade, Christian nationalists have tried to claim there's something inherently wrong with trans people, and that they're committing a bunch of mass shootings. To that end, they give 4 examples, 2 or 3 of which weren't even trans people at all. There are about 2 mass shootings a week in the United States. If being trans or trans healthcare led people to violence, how would you explain the other 99.99% of mass shooters? The argument is obviously a lie used to persecute trans people, just like all the other lies about trans people. It reveals that those making these arguments are so consumed with bigotry, they'd rather attack trans people than do anything at all to stop mass shootings. But considering how many mass shooters have emerged from online right-wing echo chambers, it's not surprising those blaming trans people couldn't care less how many children die. If you go to these right-wing groups online, which unless you're trying to troll or scam them, I do not recommend, you see lots of doctored or now just LLM-generated videos and headlines and just unsupported claims of black people stealing or hitting white people. That's because they want it to look like black people are mostly violent criminals who hate whitey and need to be policed and imprisoned and worse. They might be your family and neighbors who never say what they really believe out loud, because if they did, you could say, who says so? They just want you to be afraid of all black people, like they are, be repulsed by Latino people, and forget about Native people. You can who says so the posts. Have you seen one of those videos where a black guy punches a white guy and we're supposed to infer the black guy started it because, black people are violent and scary? Well, who says that's how it started? How do we know who started it? Even if the black guy did start it, if we don't have any more context to the video, we don't know. Which means anyone who says he did is lying because they don't know. But attacking the specifics of their claims doesn't usually change anyone's mind. I mean, I've seen that specific argument about videos of guys hitting each other play out 1,000,000 times. People made up their minds long before the argument began. The problem is their underlying beliefs and assumptions. Where did they learn this stuff? And why do they believe it? Why don't they ask who says so? You know they can. They did as kids, everyone does. But some people have really authoritarian parents and teachers. You can say, how do you know? Who told you that? Where did you learn it? You can ask why, but authority doesn't like that. The answer is often, because I say so, which conceals the real reason but reveals the facade of authority. Authority doesn't know more than you, it just has power over you. The more you push back, the more authority tries to shut you up, and you can see the violence inherent in the system. But most people are forced to give in to authority eventually, and some people learn from their experience that you either have power over others or you should obey those who do. Who says so? Your abusive parents? Your oppressive school? Your drill sergeant? Just because authority beat you doesn't mean you have to fall in line forever. There's a secret third option. disobedience. Here's another question for authority I wish I had learned to ask earlier. Why does everything have to be a hierarchy? Why are government, wealth, class, and everything they're in charge of all hierarchies? Why do people at the top of whatever get to make all the decisions and the rest of us just obey? You might have noticed employees and servants, anyone in a subordinate position, they don't tend to ask who says so type questions. That's because if you want to keep your job or maybe survive, you need to keep that kind of question to yourself. Hierarchical society encourages uncritical obedience and ass-kissing, and churns out people who think God, king, and country are reasons to kill and die. The belief in authority easily slips into bigotry. Bigotry is integral to divide and rule, after all. A common tactic of a bigot nowadays is to quote statistics and then draw their own conclusions from them. My who says so meter goes off. They say the words crime statistics. My dog perks up. She heard it. Did you? First thing about statistics is you can't just believe any and all numbers because they're written down in a report by a think tank or government. Let's not be so gullible or else eager to prove a point that's actually based on lies. But they might be technically correct. But there's very little you can infer from statistics alone. You need some kind of framework to analyze them and context to understand them. If you're coming from the right wing, you might ignore context and use the framework of race. So you might think there's something biological, or as Ben Shapiro says in public, cultural, that makes a race of people inferior. The right wing makes up reasons to justify their dreams of ethnic cleansing. My guess is none of these people were encouraged to say who says so critically, so they just accept claims based on more unsubstantiated claims. Some people are so deep in these communities of white supremacy they would need to question everything they believe to get out, and that's not easy. But if they were honest with themselves, who says so would be enough to unlearn the bullshit. The right wing also tends to uphold hierarchical gender roles. Nowadays they do it by making podcasts talking about men are this way and women are that way, although again, I cannot recommend watching them. They talk about what's masculine and what's feminine and what men do that makes them not men or gay. Everything they say, I want to ask, who says so? It's so easy to make this stuff up. It's not like they're citing biology journals or feminist scholars. At this point, they're saying whatever gets them clicks. But the underlying point is they want to decide what your gender and sexuality is, to force it into their boxes and not let it out. They come from a long line of people, mostly men, whose power comes at the expense of people marginalized for their gender. By the way, who decides what's women's work and men's work? Does women's work just mean you don't get paid? Then there's the police. Should you say, who says so to the police? Probably not. In fact, that was the George Carlin bit. Quote, I guarantee if you keep saying who says so long enough, sooner or later, someone will take you into custody. So maybe don't say it while the police officer is interrogating you. Always better to remain silent. But you can absolutely who says so the law. You can who says so every law and the whole idea of law itself. Because with every law comes the implication that it's practically and morally correct that a few people decide on and enforce the laws for everyone. Who says that's the right way to make laws? Who says the people with the most lobbyists are the best people to make the laws? Who says they need to be applied to everyone? Who says the police should enforce them? Who says we're morally obligated to follow them? Martin Luther King Jr. said we have a moral duty to disobey unjust laws. Trump says that's treason, which is punishable by death. If you get into the habit of questioning everything, it becomes second nature, and you learn to detect bullshit better. It's tough to know for sure what's true, especially as ownership of the internet concentrates and it gets harder to find reliable information, but you can still protect yourself from baseless arguments with a few simple words. Try it out today. See you next time.